So first up, the title of this video is a lie. I'm not going to be ranking all the feats because now fighting styles are apparently considered feats, but I think we can all agree that those don't really fall into the same category, so I'm not going to be looking at those. Next, and probably more importantly though, what criteria am I going to be using? But before that though, if you want to help me reach 10,000 subscribers by the time that the 2024 Player's Handbook officially releases on September 17th, I would truly appreciate it. Right now I'm projected to make it just 5 days short of my target, so every sub truly does count. Thanks again to all of my incredible members, your support truly means the world to me, but especially those in the champion tier, Julian, Corel, and Finiki. So it was important to me to not just make a strict power ranking tier list, because for me at least, it didn't always make a lot of sense. Someone will make a list and say that Crossbow Expert or Warcaster or whatever is the best feat in the game, but like, what if you don't use crossbows or cast spells? I get that the intent of them is to say that if you wanted to make a character using the most powerful things in the game, that's how you would do it, but that's never appealed to me because I don't necessarily always want to play the quote-unquote best character, but I am interested in understanding what is viable based on what I want to play. So this leads me to my categories. Always good. No matter what class or character you're playing, these feats will always be good for you. You will essentially always be able to derive value from them, and they can bolster any playstyle. Build defining. These feats, despite appearing in a lower tier, may actually be either better or worse quality than those in the always good category. The difference here is that, as per my criteria at least, build defining features are those that you might need to select to enable a particularly potent build or playstyle, or something that you might be able to truly build your character around. Build dependent. These features can be seen as more supporting roles. You don't necessarily need them, and they aren't necessarily bad either. You can think of these as more flex options that can suit multiple different playstyles and help flesh out a character without being the root of where their power comes from. Yes, there is a lot of overlap here between build dependent and build defining, and yes, a feat in build dependent could potentially be used as the crux of a build, but they just typically aren't. Niche. You probably need a specific reason to pick one of these. Maybe you're trying to do something more experimental. None of these are necessarily bad either, but they are distinctly less good or powerful in the conventional sense at least. If you have a very specific idea for a character, some of these might help support that concept. And then there's bad. These feats are just kind of, well, bad. There's very little, if any, reason to ever choose these outside of some incredibly niche or wacky concept. There are often just better ways of accomplishing what just about any of these feats will provide to your character, and from a design perspective, they kind of feel confusing too. Again, this is really just my opinion of what fits into each category based on my perspective of what value the game places on certain aspects of play and what tends to do well. In no way is this me telling you what to do or how to derive your fun. Pick whatever feats and build whatever character makes you happy. That's what this game is all about. I'm all about terrible and hilarious characters. I made a whole build on this channel called The Slurper, and it's filled with nothing but questionable choices. You might disagree with some of my categorization, and that's fine. I'm more than open to any discussion on them in the comments. But really, this is just intended to be for fun and to help players get an understanding of the landscape of feats as they are now in 2024, and where certain ones might fall. One final note on that, this is going to be focused on 2024 content. I may occasionally mention a 2014 comparison, but that isn't useful for anyone looking to exclusively be using the new books. Alright, so let's finally get started with the list. We will be including both the origin feats, which I have identified with a blue background, and the general feats, which I've identified as a red background. We'll do each category alphabetically, beginning with the origin feats. Starting strong with Alert. This is a very powerful feature. Going early in the initiative order is pretty much always beneficial, and getting to add your proficiency bonus to that initiative roll is a great way to help consistently get that. More importantly though, being able to swap your initiative with another character can be clutch. If you roll poorly on your initiative, but you're able to do something to a creature early that will benefit your party, this can be very valuable. Or maybe there's a bunch of enemies and you can end things quickly with a very well-placed fireball. Or maybe there's a flying creature and you only have melee weapons and you were supposed to go first. Now you can swap your spot with someone else and let them take charge. Alert is unquestionably in the always good category. From the very good to the very bad, Crafter is just not worth taking. Getting some tool proficiencies is okay, the 20% discount sounds fine, but remember that it's only for non-magical items, and given that most DMs are just kind of making up numbers anyway, its value is kind of all over the place. Then sure, you can craft some piece of mundane equipment, but that only lasts for 24 hours and also kind of cuts into the value of your discount even more. This is a bad feat. Next up is Healer, which is a solid feat if you're building a character to be the party healer. The unfortunate thing is that it doesn't combo with something like the Life Cleric, since those features require you to expend a spell slot on healing to get value from them. But it does have the benefit of allowing you to reroll ones for healing, and it does scale with proficiency bonus. I'm gonna put this one in build dependent. Moving on to Lucky, which despite not being quite as good as it was in 2014, is still very strong. Now, your pool of luck points equals your proficiency bonus, so yeah, it starts lower than previously, but it scales up, which is nice. However, now you can spend a point to give yourself advantage on a d20 test or impose disadvantage on another creature's d20 test. The reason this isn't quite as good as before is that now you don't get to see the results before rolling, and you can't stack it up and get super advantage with 3 dice. It's still a very useful feature though, and certainly belongs in Always Good. Next is Magic Initiate, which has always been a great feat, and that trend continues in the 2024 books. Being able to select 2 cantrips from any of the Cleric, Druid, or Wizards lists, and then a first level spell from that same list can be incredibly powerful, whether your character is a spellcaster or not. Getting access to spells like Shield, Green Flame Blade, Find Familiar, Healing Word, or the new True Strike can play a huge role in determining the progression of your character and the kinds of things that they can do. It's for that reason that Magic Initiate goes into build defining. Moving on to Musician, this origin feat is pretty incredible. You gain proficiency with 3 musical instruments of your choice. Isn't that just awesome? Okay, there's actually a second part to the feat. Encouraging Song lets you, when you finish a short or long rest, to play a song on one of your proficient instruments and then grant heroic inspiration to an amount of allies that can hear your song equal to your proficiency bonus. For those that don't know, heroic inspiration allows you, once you've seen your roll, to reroll a die and use the result. But you can do it on any roll, not just d20 tests. You can if you want to, but you could also reroll your hit points on a level up if you really were so inclined. This is incredibly strong, it scales well into the late game, and can be done multiple times per day. This can't go anywhere but Always Good. Next is Savage Attacker, and this is just so disappointing. In a world where so many features and abilities have given you the option to see a roll before using it, this does not. You can only use the feature once per turn and need to decide before you roll if you want to roll your 2 dice. Yes, this will on average increase your DPR by a marginal amount, but this feat is just so sad. It's bad. Next is Skilled, and I don't really have a whole lot to say about it. It's fine. There's nothing ever wrong with having additional proficiencies, and you can definitely build a jack-of-all-trades type character with it, but with things like Grappler no longer being determined by athletics or acrobatics checks, it certainly loses some value here. It's by no means bad, but it's certainly niche. Moving on to Tavern Brawler, this feat gives a bunch of bonuses. Your unarmed strike damage becomes a d4 plus strength, you can reroll 1s for the damage rolls of your unarmed strikes, you gain proficiency with improvised weapons, and when you use an unarmed strike as part of your attack action and deal damage, you can push the creature away by 5 feet. This is extremely good for monks, but also for anyone that just wants to focus their character around unarmed strikes. Rerolling 1s for damage isn't even limited to once per turn, and it's better than Savage Attacker since you get to see the roll, and the push feature lets you combine things that are typically separated. This is a great feat and absolutely is build defining. The final origin feat is Tough, which essentially just gives you some bonus hit points when you get it, and when you level up. This is the kind of thing that may or may not matter to you, not to say that hit points aren't relevant to everyone, but getting a few extra is likely to be more relevant based on the type of build that you're playing, so as a result, this one is build dependent. Now we're going to move away from the origin feats and get into the general feats. Every one of these has a requirement of being level 4, so they are unavailable at the beginning of the game. Also, some of these feats may have additional requirements such as a strength or dexterity score of 13 or greater. The text will include all of that information and I will address it when it's particularly important. It's also worth mentioning that every feat now includes an ability score increase, which was not the case from 2014, so that's not much of a factor in their quality anymore, which is a great change. First up is the classic, ability score improvement. This lets you increase 2 ability scores by 1 point or increase 1 by 2 points. This is pretty much always going to be relevant for basically any character. There definitely are characters that can get away with never grabbing an ASI, especially now that every feat includes half of one. So I contemplated putting this in build dependent, but I don't think it belongs there. There's just too much potential value here to have it anywhere but always good. Actor is a feat that can be useful for the right character in the right campaign. There's nothing wrong with it at all, it's just very specific. I don't have a whole lot to say about it other than if it makes sense for the type of game you're playing. It can be a ton of fun to throw this one on and have a great time, but for that reason, it's going in niche. Next up is Athlete, and it's also totally fine. I will say that Athlete has the upside of potentially being beneficial to most types of characters, given that a climb speed is just a generally good thing, and standing up from prone with only 5 feet of movement can also be great in the right circumstances. It does require either a strength or dexterity score of 13 or more, which also shouldn't be a problem for just about any character. All that said, as good as it can be, I still think it qualifies as build dependent, given that you kind of need a reason to want it, but it's also too broadly applicable to qualify as being niche. Charger now looks like a pretty solid feat, increasing the distance of your dash but also giving you the choice of additional damage or a 10-foot push provided you move at least 10 feet in a straight line prior to hitting the target. It's worth noting that the push can stack with things like the push weapon mastery or any other way you might have of pushing characters. Some specific builds can undoubtedly make good use of this, and it sounds like it would combo really well with things like Barbarian's Brutal Strike. I like this feat a lot, but I'm going to put it in build dependent since I don't think that there's quite enough here to fully build around. Next is Chef, which essentially lets you get back the Bard's old Song of Rest feature, which has been removed from the game in 2024. So replenishing meal is fine. Bolstering treats, on the other hand, is kinda sad, requiring a bonus action to only restore your proficiency bonus worth of hit points. So we're talking about a maximum of 6 hit points here. You've got to be really desperate for those hit points. That said, replenishing meal does feel like on its own it could be worth it if you're in a particularly grindy campaign or looking to provide as much additional healing as possible to your party. I'll put it in niche, but I can also see this dipping into bad. Crossbow Expert, one of the most lauded 2014 features, is back and it's still great. Probably the best thing about the new version of the feat is that it now lets you ignore the requirement of needing a free hand to reload ammunition into your crossbows, which means that you can now dual wield hand crossbows, which isn't something that you could do before. This is giving me Diablo 3 Demon Hunter vibes, and it makes me want to build something like that really bad. For that reason, Crossbow Expert is going in build defining. Crusher is also just a solid choice if you happen to rely on bludgeoning damage. Whether that's for unarmed strikes or plenty of other weapons, getting the ability to push a creature, which again can stack with your weapon masteries, makes it even better than in 2014. The extra bonus you get on critical hits is very situational and unreliable, but this is definitely going in build dependent. Next up is Defensive Duelist, and I'll say this right now, this one is a total banger. The feat requires you to have a dexterity of 13 or greater and be wielding a finesse weapon, but if you are, the payoff is fantastic. The core functionality of the feat is the same as 2014 in that it lets you add your proficiency bonus to your armor class after a creature hits you with a melee attack, but the big buff here is that it lets you now increase that AC until the start of your next turn, not just for the one attack. This is now essentially the martial equivalent of the shield spell. Yeah, it only works on melee attacks and takes a while to scale up, but technically this does eventually surpass shield in your AC bonus. This is a wonderful choice and just about anyone can make this work, so I'm gonna put it in always good. Dual Wielder is a feat that's getting a lot of buzz right now because it looks like it has some crazy interactions with the light weapon property and the Nick weapon mastery. By the looks of it, it seems like this feat can potentially enable up to 4 attacks on a single turn straight up from level 4, which is pretty insane. Sure, they have to be light weapons, so I guess there's a limitation, but I mean, it's 4 attacks, so it feels pretty worth it. I'm not going to get into the weeds on it here, that's not really the point of the video. However, I don't think it's possible to stick this anywhere but build defining, given the potential versatility and power that it has. This thing seems incredible right now. Next up is Durable, which gives you advantage on death saving throws and lets you use a bonus action to expend a hit die, roll it, and regain that number of hit points. Advantage on death saves, while not totally useless, is also not all that valuable in 5e, given how easy healing is to come by, and that it's a pretty rare occurrence to actually need it, so like 99% of the time, this is a dead feat. And the hit point regaining doesn't even add your constitution modifier, so it's pretty meager healing at that too. This one is sadly just kind of bad. Next is Elemental Adept. At first glance, this looks great. Getting to bypass resistance for your spells can be incredibly powerful, but you do have to be either extremely confident that a lot of the enemies you are facing will be resistant to the damage type you choose, and still feel compelled to choose those spells of the damage type to get any value out of this. Treating a roll of a 1 as a 2 is just a thing, I guess? It's not doing a whole lot, but I guess it's better than nothing. There's probably some wild Elementalist build here that takes this feat multiple times, but I mean, this is pretty niche. Fey Touched has always been a great feat, and it continues to be in 2024. An important upgrade that this feat got comes by virtue of the new spellcasting rules, which doesn't interfere with your ability to cast a spell if you've cast one on the same turn without expending a spell slot. So since this gives you Misty Step, and you can cast it without using a spell slot, you can still cast another spell as an action on the same turn. This is a great supporting feat on many characters, but I don't see it as a build around, so I'm going to be putting it in build dependent. Grappler, on the other hand, is definitely a build around. Being able to damage and grapple as part of the same action, having advantage on creatures you grapple, and being able to drag them around without decreasing your speed is a great setup for tons of cheese grater builds and can be incredibly well suited to any monk or really any character interested in potentially grappling or using unarmed strikes. Just the ability to set up your own advantage without having to sacrifice anything is very potent. This is build defining for sure. Moving on to Great Weapon Master, this was one of the -5/+10 feats from 2014 that has been replaced. There was a lot of controversy about those going out, but I'll be honest, I'm happy with it. Anyway, the rework still feels very solid. Now, when you hit a target with a weapon that has the heavy property on your turn, you can deal bonus damage equal to your proficiency bonus. It's worth noting that this does work with extra attacks, so this can provide some solid consistent damage output, provided of course that you hit. That, plus the ability to take another attack as a bonus action if you crit or drop a creature to 0 feels really nice. I can absolutely envision some fighter or barbarian builds making excellent use of this. I debated whether or not to be putting it in defining or dependent, but I think I'll put it in dependent for now, but I can totally see an argument for this going the other way. Next up is Heavily Armored. I don't have a lot to say about this one, just don't take it? This just isn't worth the feat. If you're desperate for heavy armor proficiency and already have medium armor training, as is required by this feat, there's better ways you can accomplish this, like through multiclassing. This is a bad feat. Heavy Armor Master, on the other hand, is actually pretty solid. With it, whenever you take bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage while you're wearing heavy armor, you reduce the damage taken by an amount equal to your proficiency bonus. Again, worth noting that this can stack since it's not a once per turn effect, so if you take multiple hits from an enemy with multi-attack, this can represent some significant damage mitigation. I'll put this in build dependent since it does rely on you both having heavy armor training and wearing heavy armor and being a frontline character. Inspiring Leader is another great way of replacing the old Song of Rest feature. This lets you grant temporary hit points equal to your level plus the modifier that you increased when you took the feat whenever you finish either a short or long rest. Potential multiple procs per day, likely starting with at least 7 or 8 hit points and scaling up over time and targeting 6 allies. This is a great feat and I don't think anyone's going to be upset about it. It's going in always good. Keen Mind was kind of a meme feat in 2014 and made famous by Liam O'Brien using it to incredible lengths in Campaign 2 of Critical Role. Anyway, getting to use the study action as a bonus action, which is basically just intelligence-based skills during combat, and not needing to sacrifice your entire action isn't awful. Plus, gaining a proficiency or an expertise isn't so bad either. I still think it's niche, but there's certainly some reasonable value here. Lightly Armored was also probably one of the worst feats in 2014, however now it grants proficiency with shields, which does greatly increase the value proposition. In 2014, if you didn't have light armor proficiency, you probably either had some form of unarmored defense or access to mage armor. And that's still kind of the case, but being able to pick up a shield and get that +2 to your AC can be potentially quite useful for a caster, provided you have a way around the super fun way that spell components continue to work. But I'm going to drop this in niche. Mage Slayer caught me by surprise. Forcing a concentrating enemy to have disadvantage on their concentration checks is good, but not necessarily a consistent thing to happen. But getting a once per long or short rest legendary resistance from intelligence, wisdom, or charisma saving throws is pretty sweet, and this has no additional prerequisites other than just being level 4. I can see just about any class picking this up and being satisfied with it. I can imagine some very fun builds utilizing this, or a character with an impenetrable mind. I'm gonna put this in build defining just because I really like it. Medium Armor Master is odd. It relies on you wearing medium armor, having a dexterity of at least 16, and wanting to wear breastplate rather than half-plate if you want to hit 17 AC, or wear half-plate and hit 18 but then have disadvantage on stealth checks, something that the 2014 version of the feature eliminated. Functionally, this is really just a +1 to your AC in some very specific circumstances. +1 AC isn't bad, it's just specific and may or may not be worth a feat, so that's why it's going in niche. Moderately armored gives you proficiency with medium armor, kinda like heavily armored. I just don't see the value in taking this feat over any of the other ones that are universally more appealing, or multiclassing into any of the myriad classes that provide the same proficiency along with a bunch of other goodies. If you truly want medium armor training and can't afford to abandon your character progression, I guess, but this is a bad feat. Mounted Combatant is a feat. It gives some reasonable bonuses if you happen to engage in mounted combat. It's cool that it allows you to increase your wisdom score, but there's just so many moving, literally, parts with this one. You need a mount, you need to be riding it, you need to be engaging with someone not mounted, you need to be subjected to a saving throw, and or have an attack target your mount. There's certainly a campaign where all of these things will be a mainstay, and if you're playing in that campaign, it's gonna be a total banger. But just because of how inconsistent it seems, it's gonna go in niche. Observant is basically Keen Mind, but for wisdom. Instead of the study action, it lets you take the search action as a bonus action. There's nothing wrong with it at all. It's just going to suit a very particular character, so it's going in niche. Piercer is yet another niche feat. You have to be wielding a piercing weapon, and in order to get maximum value, you need to both crit and roll badly on your damage roll. All of the things that it does are good, they're just not reliable. But getting a potential save against bad damage rolls can be nice. In any case, yeah, this is a niche feat. Poisoner is another feat that does a lot of great things. It's just a tough sell. Poison is by far the most common damage resistance and immunity in the game, and it's not even close. And this doesn't circumvent poison immunity, which is roughly a third of all creatures in the game, at least including all 2014 content. It's crazy. On top of that though, you're going to be burning through gold just to have the chance to deal a bit of extra poison damage and apply the poison condition. It's also worth noting that there is a bit of asymmetry between applying the poison to a melee weapon or a ranged weapon. The poison wears off after a minute or after you hit a target, whichever is shorter. But if you swing your melee weapon and miss, you can just swing again. But if you shoot a poison arrow and miss, you probably can't go back and pick it up again. This is definitely obvious, but it is worth mentioning and certainly gears this more towards use with melee weapons. This one's also going in niche, but I can see some cool poison expert builds with it though. Next up is Polearm Master, which is a classic from 2014 and is still great today. A single feat that offers the opportunity for a bonus attack and famously allows you to make an opportunity attack against a creature entering your melee range is an incredibly strong ability that tons of builds have been centered around for a decade and surely more to come. This is a build defining feat. Resilient lets you choose any ability that you don't have saving throw proficiencies in and increase its score by 1 and then also gain proficiency in that save. This is just very good and any character can get incredible benefits from this. Especially if the chosen ability score is sitting at an odd number, Resilient is just always good. Moving on to Ritual Caster, I'll cut to the chase, this one's just kinda bad. You need to be 4th level to pick it, at which point you're only able to choose 1st level spells. You also need to have an intelligence, wisdom, or charisma of at least 13, and you can also only select spells with the ritual tag. There is the benefit of being able to get additional spells like Find Familiar, which you may not already have, but this just feels like a lot of potential to sacrifice to get something like that. Yes, it does scale with your proficiency bonus, but I don't know, it just doesn't feel worth it. I contemplated putting this in niche, but I do think it ultimately belongs in bad. There's probably some reason to pick it, and I'm definitely wrong about this, so feel free to let me know in the comments. Sentinel, like Polearm Master, is another great feat from 2014 and is somehow kind of better now. Not only do you get the ability score increase, but you also get to make opportunity attacks immediately after they take the disengage action. They don't even need to try to move anymore. And they got rid of the stipulation that the target can't have the Sentinel feat. This is a very strong feat, and any frontline attacker or tank can make excellent use of it. This is build defining. Shadow Touched, much like Fey Touched, is another great supporting feature. Invisibility doesn't provide quite the same benefit as Misty Step did since it's not a bonus action to cast, though you still get to cast it without a spell slot, so you could still bonus action cast another spell. It's a solid feat and worth considering for a variety of builds, and it goes in build dependent. Sharpshooter is the other half of the -5/+10 duo, but I don't think it got quite as good of a treatment as Great Weapon Master did. It's still a very good feat and essentially includes all of the Sharpshooter benefits, except of course the -5/+10 from before, and added the ability score increase and the ability to not be impaired by firing while in melee with an enemy, which is a fairly situational benefit anyway. It's still good, don't get me wrong, but it feels more build dependent than defining now. Shield Master is a strong feature that can enable some very good builds. Having the opportunity to bash the enemy with your shield and knock them prone, potentially self-activating your own advantage on a follow-up attack or one for another melee ally without needing to sacrifice anything again, is very strong. Interposed Shield gives you a more conditional version of evasion, but it's still good. I'm gonna put this in build defining since I can see plenty of ways that characters could take advantage of this. There isn't a whole lot to say about Skill Expert. You get a proficiency and an expertise. There's nothing wrong with any of these things. But again, it does lose some potential value since grapples are no longer tied to athletics checks. It's not bad, but it feels niche. If you're going for that jack-of-all-trades style build, this will be amazing though. Skulker could have gone a few ways. I can see it being the basis for some very fun stealth-heavy builds, but a lot of the features are situational unless you do fully plan to try and hide every single turn in combat. That said, 10 feet of blind sight is straight up awesome, and there's even a whole fighting style that does just that and nothing else. I feel like I want to put this in build dependent, but it just seems so fun and like the kind of character that I would want to play, and I can see something centered around it, so I'm gonna put it in build defining, but I can see that changing. Slasher is the third part of the trio that is Slasher, Piercer, and Crusher, the core of the Slurper build. Anyway, this one is better than Piercer in that you can basically at least always get benefit out of reducing a creature's speed and giving a disadvantage on attacks until the start of your next turn. It can really help out some party members. This is still a build dependent feature though. Speedy is the replacement for the 2014 feature Mobile, which was always a favorite, and it's still great now because it's more or less the same, but better since it now offers an ability score increase. The biggest change here comes in the agile movement section, which could be better or worse than 2014 depending on the scenario. Before, you just didn't provoke opportunity attacks from a creature that you attacked, whether you hit it or not. Now, you can still provoke opportunity attacks from anyone, but those attacks have disadvantage against you. This makes the feature potentially more useful if you're zooming through the battlefield and potentially incurring multiple opportunity attacks. Anyway, just about any character can get benefits from this, and it's very powerful and a very flexible feat. It's always good. Spell Sniper just essentially provides you a bunch of buffs to your cantrips. Well, yeah, there are leveled spells that utilize spell attacks, the vast majority of them don't. So if you do focus heavily on cantrips or the few other spells that do use spell attacks, this can be useful. I'm just not sure that I can see it though. I would have to put this in niche, and quite niche at that. Telekinetic is a fun feature that can be utilized in a few builds, but can be used to great effect in empowering some cheese grater type builds. Being able to telekinetically shove a creature on a failed save can be super powerful even if you aren't doing those cheese grater builds though and just want to have them forced into an area of effect. Invisible Mage Hand with increased range is also pretty spicy though. This is going to go in build dependent. Telepathic has always felt like a missed opportunity to me since both creatures need to share a common language, which wasn't always the case with telepathy in the 2014 PHP, but does seem to be more consistently the case now. Detect Thoughts is a very fun and very good spell that can lead to some amazing moments at the table. I ultimately think that this feat is still niche and will do best with a very specific type of character, but I love what it has to offer. Warcaster is another famously great feat from 2014, that still continues now. Being able to cast a spell as an opportunity attack, even with the restrictions of it being a one-action cast and targeting only one single creature, it's still a very powerful ability. However, it's worth mentioning that in 2024, opportunity attacks are no longer limited to enemies, but to any creature leaving your space. This includes allies. So, being able to hit one of your allies with something like Armor of Agathis, Bless, Invisibility, or Haste can be so good and makes Warcaster even better. This is a build-defining feature. Finally, Weapon Master. This is just a niche feat. You get the mastery property of one weapon. If you're a martial character, you already have Weapon Mastery, and if you're more of a caster, then there's probably something else that you'd rather do, unless you had something incredibly specific in mind. So again, this is going in niche. And that's it. That's my ranking of every 2024 Player's Handbook feat. I hope this was useful in some way to give you an understanding of where and why a certain feat might be considered better than others, and help you think of different ways to design and build your characters. I'm sure my list will look very different than your list, and that's okay. This is a game and it's all for fun. Let me know some of your thoughts or build ideas in the comments below. I can't wait to check them out. Check out some of my other D&D content. Subscribe to help me hit 10K before September 17th, but otherwise, take care.